as we look forward to 2011, we have been very fortunate this year in our schools, particularly here in the Gulf Coast, that weather has cooperated. We haven't had a hurricane or a major storm that has affected us in the west part of the Gulf. But unfortunately, I think, and I'm an amateur weatherman, by the way, and I'm predicting that we're going to have a hurricane in Austin in January. Now, January hurricanes are fairly rare, and they're really bad when they get as far inland as Austin. So it's going to be a struggle, and it's going to be very difficult. This will be the 18th regular session, and a lot of special sessions that I've worked with the legislature. I think the budget circumstance this time is as bad as I've ever seen it. Current projections obviously are, and you've seen the recent numbers of a deficit of as high as $21 billion. I hope that improves as we get into the session. Again, we're making a projection. We're looking into the future for the period of time that starts September 1st, 2011 and runs through August 31st, 2013. And so, you know, I think we can certainly hope that we begin to see improvements in our state's economic condition as we get into the session. But 21 billion is, in my math, is a fairly significant number, and to try to cover that is going to be very difficult. We do have a state rainy day fund of $9 billion. I think some portion of that will probably be reasonable. If this isn't a rainy day, I'm not sure what is. There are accounting things that can be done. Certain expenditures that might be part of the next biennium can be postponed, whether that is a foundation payment to schools in July and August of 2013 that could be rolled into the next biennium. Certainly instructional materials have been part of the discussion. There are a variety of different things that can be looked at, but I think our real struggle in education, frankly, is going to be to get through this without making major cuts that do structural damage to our schools. And I want to make a point here. As we talk about cuts in other areas of the budget, there tends to be usually a corresponding reduction in what the expectation is. If we reduce funding for transportation, there simply will be projects that don't get built. They'll still be on the list, but they simply won't get to the top of the list. They won't be funded. They won't get built. I don't think anybody's talking about laying off 500,000 school kids. $3 billion funds every art program, music program, debate program, band, extracurricular program in the state of Texas in every district. Are we seriously going to eliminate all of those programs? I don't think so. So I think part of the concern in education, and where it will be a difficult discussion, unlike other areas of the budget, is nobody's talking about doing less. Remember, we have a growing population that we're trying to get to higher standards. I don't hear any discussion about backing off on what that expectation is. I don't hear any discussion about saying, well, maybe we just won't fund the kids who are coming to our state for this 2-year period. Maybe we won't fund those 160,000 extra kids. And so I think our issues in education are going to be in a tight budget, what can we postpone? Where are the areas that we trim that don't do structural damage to our system? And I think that's going to be a pretty hard conversation. I think it's probably going to be, again, I'm an optimist by nature. I really work at it. But I think this is going to be the most difficult session that we've seen in probably 30 years. Probably going back to the first oil embargo in the early 1970s. I mean, it's going to be an interesting time. It's going to be a hard session. There are other issues. Obviously, redistricting is an important issue. There are other issues that will also take time and attention. But I think the overall issue for this session is how we deal with the budget. How we fund the essential services that we all need and expect and use, and also how we do that in a circumstance where we have a real genuine budget crisis. I want to just close my remarks with a couple of observations. First of all, to the Chamber, thank you so much for all of you in business, for the work you do to work with your schools and support your schools. How many of you have been in a school so far this year, either as a parent or a volunteer or in some capacity? I have. It's part of my job. I've also been there as a parent. I want to make an observation. Nationally, about 72% of adults don't have school-age kids. Now, our percentage is a little better than that in Texas, somewhere around 69 to 70%. We're a younger state. 69, 70% of Texas adults do not have school-age kids. How many here have school-age kids? Great, I do. How we succeed with getting our community supports for our schools is going to depend an awful lot on that 70% that don't have school-age kids. And so I know our districts are working on this, our organizations like the Chamber focus on this. We all tend to support things that we're more familiar with and that we know something about, right? In fact, just in the last month, the Gallup poll, every year for the last 45 years, the Gallup poll and Phi Delta Kappa magazine do a survey of the public's attitudes towards the public schools. And they've asked the same questions over like a 4-decade period. So it is a wonderful wealth of information because you can track how people's thinking about schools changes over time. If you ask a generic question, what do you think generally about the schools in the United States? What answer do you think you get? They're going to hell in a handbasket. Get a little closer to home and say, well, what do you think about the schools in your community? Response goes up. People say, well, they're pretty good. If you ask a question and say, what do you think about the school that your oldest child attends? Well over 3/4 of the people give them A's and B's. Say, well, they're great. They're really good. And that percentage has been getting higher over a 3-decade period. So I think engaging this large portion of our adult population that doesn't have school-age kids is going to be critical to our success with our school populations, and it's something I know all of our districts are working on. Just another couple of observations from the Gallup poll that I thought were interesting. One question that they ask periodically is, would you want your child to be a teacher? That tells you a lot about how education and about how teaching is viewed, the status, and how it's regarded. 20 years ago, less than half the respondents said yes. You know what the answer was this year? Over 2/3 said yes. A huge statistical swing over a period of years. So there's some interesting things going on. And by the way, when you ask nationally, you say, what is the single biggest problem that our schools are struggling with in education? And this isn't asking educators. This isn't just asking parents. This is general populace. Overwhelmingly, the issue that overwhelms every other issue is funding for schools is the number one problem. In the last 20 years, the percentage of people who identified Drugs as the number one problem dropped from nearly 40% to less than 5%. Think about that. The percentage who identified discipline as the number one problem dropped from between 25 and 30% to less than 10%. But the overwhelming problem that everybody sees around the country is how do we fund this large, growing enterprise that we depend so much on in our communities. And I think that's going to continue to be a struggle, and it's particularly going to be a struggle in Texas this spring as we deal with our budget shortfall. Two last observations. Tamara and I, our two daughters, our oldest daughter is graduated from a public high school, Houston ISD, and is currently in college. Our youngest daughter is a junior in high school. And we're currently hosting our 4th foreign exchange student. We've done this for years. And Roberto from Italy is living with us right now. And we've gotten to know a lot of the foreign exchange students over the years as we've done this. And it's really interesting to see yourself through the eyes of people from somewhere else. We tend to see our problems when we're dealing with them up close, but it's also good to see the strengths. Roberto's been here 6 weeks. He's trying to figure out how not to go home. That's his number one objective. He and I were talking about it last night. Several years ago, I remember one young woman, Ellie from the Czech Republic, at the end of the school year, I arranged for a number of the kids to speak to the Houston ISD School Board, and one of the board members asked about their experiences. And Ellie said, it's the best year of my life. And she said, I'm going home because I'm required to go home, but I intend to come back. I intend to live my life as an American. So that's a takeaway on her experience in the public schools. And I think as we deal with our problems, we also have to remember our strengths and build on those. A couple of years ago, Tony Blair was asked what he thought about America, and whether America had lost its moral leadership. Had America, because of all the problems that we had we lost that leadership position in the world community? And I always thought Tony Blair was fairly insightful, but his response to his questioner, he said, well, I have a question for you. Are more people trying to get in, or are more people trying to get out? And the questioner was kind of surprised. He said, well, more people are trying to get in. And Tony said, I think you just answered your own question. I think we need to remember that about Texas. We are going to deal with some real problems this spring, but we have to deal with them with an attitude of we can accomplish this. We have to remember that people are trying to come to Texas to be part of what we're doing here, not leave Texas. And in our schools and all of the problems that we are dealing with, I've yet to hear a single educator say, to heck with it, I'm moving to Mississippi. So let's be honest about our problems. We're going to have to confront them. We're going to have to confront them in a bipartisan way, and they're going to be difficult. But let's deal with them from a position of recognizing our strengths and not just wallowing in our problems. So that's kind of the sermon for the day. I'm going to stop. Rob, you haven't gonged me yet, so hopefully I didn't run over too much.